Stories don't merely entertain us, they preserve us. Before history books, before podcasts, before social media, there were storytellers. And perhaps we've never needed them more than we do today. Every family has that one person who can tell a story so well that you've heard it 20 times and you're gladly listen to it a 22nd time. Before we wrote history down, we passed it down from generation to another around campfires, dinner tables, and front porches. Stories shaped civilizations long before they filled bookshelves. My guest today has devoted his life to keeping that tradition alive. Not simply telling stories, but preserving wonder, history, humor, and humanity through them. Today, we're pulling up a chair with one of the world's great storytellers, Mr. Tim Lowry. Welcome to the Pulpit Porch, where we have real conversations about life, faith, and meaning.
It's a little bit of sports and pop culture mixed in.
It's all about living a life of purpose on purpose.
So pull up a chair, grab some sweet tea, and join us on the porch.
Tim Lowry, it is an honor to have you here with me in person. This is your second time on this show, but first time in person.
Yes, indeed. And I must say, you have acclimated very well, Mr. Marr, because you're not a native of East Tennessee. But in your introductory comment, you said there's a family member who tells a story and everybody loves to hear it, and you don't care to hear it again. That's a Tennessee. That's a Tennessee Appalachian Mountain thing, because in other parts of the country, that would mean you never wanted to hear it again. But here, when you say I don't care to hear that again, that means you do want to hear it again, using care in that old-fashioned sense of it will not worry or trouble me to hear it again.
I'm going to take that as a compliment. I had a realization that I am 1 year away from having lived in Tennessee longer than I lived in Las Vegas.
Oh, there you go. That's fun.
That's
my late mother-in-law was a native of Michigan, and she settled with her family in southeastern Kentucky in Appalachia. And when one of her children was a little tiny baby, she had the baby on her lap at church, and a very traditional mountain lady said, "That's a pretty baby. I wouldn't care to hold it." And she said, "Well, you don't have to." And she said, "No, I mean, I would like to hold it."
Oh, goodness. So, Tim, where did this all start for you?
Being a professional storyteller?
Yeah, your love of story, all of that.
Well, I'll tell you what I told my priest one time. He was doing a Bible study, and he said, "What makes you long for the goodness of God?" And I just blurted out. I was the first person in the group to answer. I said, "Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus." And he went, "That is not the answer I was expecting." So when I was 6 years old, my mom and dad took me to see the circus. And that was my very, very first introduction to show business. And I was hooked. I mean, it was just a done deal. 10 minutes in, I loved everything about it. So a whole bunch of my faith journey was trying to figure out, can a Christian be in the circus? Is that allowed? I just recently, in fact, next week at our church, it's Vacation Bible School, and the theme for all the decorations and stuff is circus. And I was telling somebody next to me in the pew on Sunday, I said, "That's going to be the greatest Bible school theme." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "I've always seen the circus as a extended metaphor for life." I said, "Think about it. You have the person on the high wire, which reminds you, you must live your life in balance. If you don't, the consequences can be deadly when you get out of balance." I said, and then you see, I said that all the animals for me have always been, you see these animals working with people the way normally you don't see wild animals working. I said, and that is a reminder that we will be in a peaceable kingdom at some future point where animals and people get along again like they did in the Garden of Eden. Like, look at that, how they partner with each other. I said, you see all kinds of these. I said, the clowns remind us lots of people smile, but everyone behind that smile has heartbreak going on, and you see that and you're reminded of that, keep smiling. I just see the whole circus as a extended metaphor for life. So that's how it started for me. Then I had to find out where my place was in showbiz, but that's how it started.
And how did that go?
Well, when I was a little kid, I'd play circus all the time. And my mom, I have one of those rare mothers who did not pray her boy out of show business. She prayed him into it. She just ran with that. So she would, seek out little opportunities for me to be in the school play or the church Christmas pageant and that kind of thing. And then we had a very dear, close family friend. She was just a little older than me. So when she was a teenager and I was a little boy, she was my babysitter. And then when I was a teenager, she was my drama teacher. And she was a big part of me figuring out where, I would come down in show business, because she and I were good friends. And then she was my mentor and teacher and all of that. Then I went off to college, still kind of wondering. I declared a theater major from the get-go.
Did you know, what age did you realize show business is what I'm meant to do?
Well, when I was in summer camp, we had a series of Bible lessons on the book of Ruth. And at that time, I loved show business. I always loved being in plays. I loved to go see, productions when I could and that kind of thing. But I really thought that I was being called to be a missionary in a foreign country. And so we had this Bible study on the book of Ruth. And I was in 8th grade, and I was just wanted everything in my life to be arranged so that I could be a missionary. But I was only in 8th grade.
Yeah.
I needed to do high school and college and all of that. And I remember our Bible teacher talking about how lots of people interpret the book of Ruth as a metaphorical picture. It's a true story, but a metaphorical picture of Christ and his relationship to the church. Boaz representing the Redeemer kinsman. And so there comes that point where Ruth is getting very agitated because she's like, I think he likes me. I think maybe he might marry me. And she's telling, her mother-in-law, Naomi, I think this would be a good thing. And Naomi says, just sit still. You've done everything you need to do. Just sit still. Boaz will work this out. And it all turns out, happily ever after love story. And the Holy Spirit used that story to tell me, just chill. I'm glad you're willing to be a missionary, but just let me work this out. It's going to take some time. You be Ruth and I'll be Boaz. Just let this work out. So over my high school career, I began to understand what I loved about missionaries were the dramatic stories they all have. They have the best stories of things that happen in these exotic places where they live. And so I began to realize, no, it's not a call to missions. It's a call to showbiz. So, but there was still a little bit of a, guilty pleasure in that. It's like, really? That's not a very noble calling. Plenty of people preach against that play act and stuff. So I declared a theater major right off the get-go in college. And of course, your freshman year, you take a bunch of classes that have nothing to do with theater because you have to get your science and all that out of the way. So I walk into this big science lecture hall, and the teacher, there were about 400 of us freshmen in this lecture hall, and the teacher looks up at us and he says, before we begin this lecture on biology, I think it was biology, he said, let's talk about the will of God. And you could hear 400 18-year-olds go, oh no. He said, how many of you have declared a major, but you're not sure that's what you're going to do? Hands start going up all over the place. And he said, okay, now I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and you don't need to raise your hand. Just answer for yourself in your own mind. He said, are you doing those simple little things that you learned in Sunday school as a little kid, like read your Bible, pray every day, and you'll grow? Thinking, yeah. He said, do you want to follow the will of God? And thinking, yeah. He said, all right, if you're endeavoring to follow him in those little things that are very clear. God wants you to be a student of his word. He wants you to have a prayer life. He said, if you're following him in those little things, I have a word from the Lord for you. Just do whatever you want to do. And everybody went, what? And he said, it's called changing your major. He said, if that's not what God intends for you to do, that's what you're here for. It'll work out. So just pursue a path until it's clear you need to change your path. And so from that moment on, I was like, I'm going to be a theater major without apology. And I never looked back.
How was that journey in college?
It was a wonderful experience. It really was a wonderful experience. I had a professor who was also part of a professional organization called Christians in Theater Arts. And so over the course of my college career, I just met people from all different performance backgrounds, solo artists, designers, people who were singers and dancers on Broadway, people who worked in the film industry in Hollywood, who were committed Christians. That was foremost important in their life, but they also were very dedicated to their work and their art and endeavoring to do excellent work because they all agreed we represent the King of the universe. We've got to do good work, because of who we represent. And so that it made, my college career very exciting to just see people who were out there doing that thing that I dreamed about doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a very good experience.
I may be off on this, but my assumption would be that every great storyteller starts off as a great listener.
Oh, yeah.
And
so I think that's true.
Is there anybody, as you think back to your earliest days, that captivated a room, that you just hung on every word they said?
My wife and I both agree with this. We had the distinct privilege of growing up in communities that really valued elders. And so our parents were not at all apologetic at having us in a room where there were just adults and you were expected to sit on the floor and listen to what they were talking about, And we had a number of elders that were like extra grandparents to us. And so that pretty early on, I learned to listen and then I would repeat stories, that I heard them tell. And people would say, how do you know that? I'm like, well, so-and-so told me that. That's their experience. There are a couple stories that are big parts of my repertoire that were just simply shared with me by an older person in my community. One time I had a school friend named Jeremy, and I kind of knew his mom and dad. Well, I just kind of knew who his grandparents were, but I'd not really visited with them much. And one day my dad took me to visit Jeremy's grandpa, whose name was Jack. And he was a decorated World War II veteran. And he just sat me down, just my dad and Jack and me. And he talked to me for 4 hours and told me all about his military career in World War II. And he had big time adventures, like not every soldier gets a feature film, but Jack could have been the subject of another Tom Hanks movie. He had all kinds of adventures. And he's long gone now. So I just tell what he told me to audiences, and particularly students of history are just fascinated. And I say, I'm just telling you what a man told me, learn to listen. My dad insisted on that.
Your dad was a preacher. You were a PK.
Yeah.
How much did that influence you growing up?
Because I grew up in the church, I heard storytelling in that context from the time I was born, so I had Sunday school teachers who told stories, that visiting missionaries told stories. There were always story books and story records in my house. One of the storytellers that I listened to on recording all the time was named Ethel Barrett. She was an extremely gifted, dramatic woman And in fact, when I was very young, there were certain story records my parents would not let me listen to after dark because they knew I would not be able to sleep, because she told about the attempted assassination of the boy King Joash by his grandmother, Queen Athaliah. And then, of course, Athaliah gets it right out by the horse gate at the back courtyard of the temple. And it was so graphically described. Little kids would, be like, I can't sleep. I just heard a story about murder. So that was a big part of my, coming up. Like, I was the preacher's kid, so those things were always around.
Yeah. So for our listeners that don't know, what you spend most of your time doing is standing on stages by yourself, talking, telling stories to large crowds all over the country without elaborate sets, without dialogue with another person, not in any sort of character, just as Tim Lowry yourself, without major props and costume changes and lighting effects and sound effects and all of that. How did you go from being a theater major, and I'm assuming thinking that what you wanted to do was theater and plays and acting and all that, to what you're doing now?
I was doing what I knew, what I'd been introduced to. So I loved playing roles in plays. When I was in high school, I went to high school in Kentucky. The Kentucky High School Speech League every year sponsored these speech tournaments where you would, there was debate, but then there was also public speaking and persuasive speaking and duo acting, dramatic monologue. One of the categories that you could compete in was traditional storytelling. And for whatever reason, the Kentucky Speech League decided, we're going to eliminate storytelling. We don't want to do that anymore. Well, my teacher and several other teachers, particularly where I grew up in Appalachia in southeastern Kentucky, made a big stink about that, because they said that is a traditional art form of mountain people. Do not take that away from our speech league. That's something that we should really encourage and champion, because it's who we are. We tell stories, we chew tobacco, and we do both of those on the front steps of the local courthouse, and look out, because you might get spit on. and so they said, okay, fine. We'll continue with the storytelling category. And then my teacher came to me and she said, all right, we won that argument. We have to enter, and you're in. So I had always enjoyed doing storytelling, but I had no idea you could make a living as a storyteller. And then when I went to college, because I had been an award-winning high school storyteller, I thought, I'm going to take that storytelling class. That'll be an easy 2-hour credit. My teacher worked me like a mule. I mean, we worked so hard for her. She was a lovely lady, and we really enjoyed the class. There were about a dozen of us in that class, but you worked. I mean, she put you through the paces, and we got extra credit for going to a local storytelling festival. So I went to this local festival and sat all weekend listening to storytellers on small stages, just, telling stuff. And I was like, I had no idea. So I knew right away. It was like that. Because I loved stage performance. Film never even entered my imagination. I mean, I enjoyed watching movies, but I just never imagined myself working in that industry. I would romantically imagine myself being on Broadway. I think every theater kid does. Yeah. But all the practicalities of that, like, who do you know that you sleep on their couch in New York while you're trying to, I never even got that far imagining all of that. It was just a romantic notion. But when I saw storytellers, I realized I could do that. I have the necessary background. I have, necessary connections with churches and things that would want storytelling, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden I was like, I know where I fit, So I immediately went to a local bookstore and gave them a proposal to be their resident storyteller. And they said, sure, we'll do that, So that's how
you did that while you were still in college?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we would do storytelling program for children every other Saturday morning. I still consider it a great bit of a resume that I had several children who would tell me regularly that they had skipped Saturday morning cartoons to come hear the Storyteller at the bookstore. That made me very proud.
I was going to say, that's got to feel good, especially back then. Yeah, because you didn't miss Saturday morning cartoons.
No, that was the only time you could get them.
Yeah. But it wasn't like now where they're on demand anytime you want.
Right.
On Netflix or Prime. You had to, you counted down until Saturday morning.
You got to eat the cereal that was sugared up on Saturday.
Yep,
you didn't have to eat woodchuck cereal, and you could rot your brain watching
Smurfs
cartoons.
and Tiny Toon Adventures. Oh, I remember it well. So you graduate from college, and then what? What was the plan?
My school required that theater majors also earn a teaching degree, which all us theater majors, complained about. I don't want to teach. I want to be a star. But they were very smart because they knew most of you are not going to be a star, and you're going to have a way to earn a living and support your family.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Were you doing theater productions all through college as well?
Mm-hmm,
So when you went to that festival, did you have do you remember a specific shift of saying, okay, I think this is what I want to do now instead of being on stage in a theater production? Or was that still your aspiration?
It was a pretty quick shift to storytelling. And I think one thing that helped it shift right away was I made a proposal to a bookstore and they went, yes, and we will pay you for this service. Whereas everything at college was you were killing yourself for free.
Yeah.
And I was like, there is a way to make a living as a performer rather than, starving to death. And so that kind of helped things along. And then I got into where at college, I had the opportunity to work on opera staff, and I knew I don't have the voice for opera. I'm never going to perform opera, but I loved those bigger than life stories and how they were presented. So, I did a lot of production work rather than, up on the stage work the second half of my college career, and enjoyed that very much. So I graduated college with a theater major and a teaching degree in speech education. I lived in Greenville, South Carolina. I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, and picked up the phone when I got settled in a little efficiency apartment and called the public library, because in Greenville, I had been part of a storytelling club. It was just community people who met at the bookstore where I worked that would share stories and coach each other. And so when I moved to Charleston, after I graduated and was out on my own, I just picked up the phone and called the public library and said, is there a storytelling club in Charleston? They said, there is. So they gave me a phone number, and I called the phone number, and the guy who was the leader of the group told me where they met. I met these people, and a number of them were retired school teachers who did storytelling as a hobby. And one of them said, if you want to do professional storytelling, you should apply to the South Carolina Arts Commission. It's like an application and audition process. Once you're on that roster of approved artists, people can spend state education dollars to bring you as a guest artist to their school to do performance work or artist in residence work where you will teach your art form to children. So I auditioned, and God knows what he's doing when he orchestrates things. Storytelling is such a niche performance art that the commission didn't really know what storytelling was. What they knew was theater. But because my background was theater, just by default, when I did my audition tape, I put on a costume, I had a wig, I told a story in first person. And so I got through the audition process easily because I was theatrical and they understood that. Other storytellers would say, I cannot get added to that approved list because they're like, where's your costume? Where's your makeup? And so that was nice. That helped things along. That's where professional storytelling got started. That's how it began.
You think most people, when they hear storytelling, they think of little kids and sitting in a library reading a book or doing a puppet show or something on a flannel graph.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. That's what they think. You're a storyteller. Usually, what do you do for a living? I'm a professional storyteller. And they say, you read books to kids? Like, no, that's not what I do. And so then we talk. Some people, they're old now. They're old. I'm 56, so I'm talking like 70-year-olds. You can say, do you remember a guy in the country music scene named Jerry Clower? Oh, yes, he was so funny. I loved him. I do that for a living. And they go, okay, I understand. I understand what you do. But anybody younger than that generation, the next point of reference historically would be Bill Cosby's comedy albums, because he did not do one-liner jokes. Right. He would do these long stories that got funnier and funnier as he went. Yeah. And you would say, remember the Bill Cosby comedy albums? Oh, yeah. I say, that's the kind of thing I do. It's not always comedy, but that's the kind of thing I do. Oh, and then the very next question is, and people pay you for that?
You said, hopefully.
Like, yeah.
Hopefully they do. That's the plan. Yeah. What did people think when you told them, I'm going to be a storyteller?
Well, I did storytelling largely through the South Carolina Arts Commission for a school year. And that went really well. My very first gig, I was at a booking conference, and a teacher came to me and said, we had an artist lined up to do some work at our school, and they had a family emergency and had to cancel. So we're kind of desperate. We've already got everything situated. We already have a schedule planned and everything. We just need to plug a different artist into that slot. Would you be willing to come to my little rural school in Estill, South Carolina? You go to the fourth corner of the earth and turn left, and you come to Estill, South Carolina, and do a month's worth of work for us. You'd be working with first graders, and we have this amount of money, this budget. Sure. Yes, I would love to do that. And from there, I did that month. One school recommended me to the next school, recommended to the next. So I spent a whole school year just going on word of mouth. And I was like, this is great. This is easier than I thought it was going to be. And then there was a big election year, and all these people were out of the United States Congress, and all these other people were in the United States Congress. And so, funding starts getting shifted around, and priorities get changed on what politicians are going to approve for funding. And the state of South Carolina said, we receive a lot of federal grant money for our arts program. If the political winds keep going in the same direction, they might close our department. So we highly encourage any of our artists who have a teaching degree, that thing that I did not want to do, find yourself a classroom job. And so I did. And I taught school for 5 years.
What did you teach?
I taught English language arts to everybody. I started in high school, and that was a part-time job. And then to move to full-time employment, I transferred to a different school in the district the next year, and I taught English language arts for 8th graders for 2 years. And then I got married, and my wife and I had an opportunity to teach together as teaching partners at a small Christian school. So I stepped down and taught 5th grade as
Did you meet her
teacher.
While teaching?
No, I knew her from when she was a little girl. We grew up in neighboring counties in Kentucky, and our families have been friends forever and ever. So we knew each other as children. We just grew up together. And she had gone to one college, and I'd gone to another. And we met back up after we had finished college, and realized, ooh, you grew up. Ooh, you're very attractive. Ooh, I never dreamed. So that was that. But so we got married and taught school together for 2 years. I taught 5th grade. She was the elementary music teacher. But I never really wanted to be in the classroom. I really enjoyed the children because I'm a full people person. I love people. I love to be around people. I find lots of energy from being in social situations. So I really enjoyed that aspect. but there's so much of school that is not that, the minutia of grading and the different regulations you have to follow. And I'm a little too much of a free spirit for that. That really is hard for me. So it's really itching to go back to storytelling. And by then, political winds had shifted again. The South Carolina Arts Commission was fine. But more importantly, my wife and I had gone to a theater conference sponsored by that professor who was a officer in Christians in Theater Arts. And I saw a lot of these Christian artists that I had known from college again, still doing their thing, doing it even bigger and even better, and the Holy Spirit used that conference to remind me, I don't need a National Endowment of the Arts. I don't need a South Carolina Arts Commission. I don't even need so-and-so to be in political office for me to give you the resources you need to do what I have called you to do. And my wife very much agreed with that. So we just up and quit our jobs.
All right. So we've got to back up a little bit more, because you've told me the story before of what really happened at that conference. So you've got to tell
it was
that
a
story.
Great conference. It was at Ridgecrest Conference Center, the big Baptist Conference Center in Asheville, North Carolina. And the people who had brought artists to speak and do workshops and all of that had really curated the evening. We would dedicate every evening after supper to a double feature show. And they had brought performers from all over the country. And so like on Monday night, there was a church drama group that did a musical about pioneers. It was a really fun musical called Quilters, I think was the name of it. And it was a series of monologues and musical pieces about pioneer women and the importance of quilting in their life. The next night, there was a performance duo, husband and wife, that did they did a lot of performing for like couples retreats and stuff. So they concentrated on stories of the Bible about the famous marriages of the Bible, Abraham and Sarah and that kind of thing. The next night, Max McLean, who is the founder of Fellowship for the Performing Arts, I just saw him. That was really fun. I saw him perform almost 30 years ago, and I just saw him perform again this past winter, and was able to go up to him and say, you need to know that your performance was a major shifting point in my career. He said, thank you for telling me that. He did a one-man show of the book of Genesis. The night, the week culminated with Ballet Magnificat doing a beautiful ballet, a whole recital of their work, a Christian ballet company. So it just got more and more exciting as the week went on. The shows got bigger and bigger every night. And I'm thinking, I'm listening to workshops, I'm hearing devotionals, I'm watching these performers, and I'm just thinking, this is where I need to be, And so one afternoon I said, I'm going to take a hike. And my wife, Bonnie, said, and I'm going to take a nap. I said, okay. So I left our hotel room and I got about, 30 steps. And there was a porch swing out on a little patio overlooking the mountains. I could not walk another step. I was just so overwhelmed by the Holy Spirit. I just sat on that porch swing and prayed for about an hour. Just that really wonderful kind of prayer where you don't say as much as you just sit and listen, And then I got up and I went back to the hotel room, and Bonnie was awake, and she said, I could not sleep. I thought I was going to take a nap. I've been praying for an hour. I need to tell you something. I said, I need to tell you something. She said, let's just say it at the same time. 1, 2, 3. We both went, let's quit our jobs and you go back to professional storytelling. So we did. She moved from the little private school we were teaching at to public school, which gave us, like good health benefits, a retirement plan, all of that kind of stuff. And I launched out entirely on my own. And pretty quickly, she taught school for a while, but then she left the classroom and just would travel with me. And we did that for several years, but I've been a professional storyteller ever since. She's back in the classroom now that our kids are big and teaching music again. But that's how that happened.
Was there a moment when you realized that storytelling was more than just entertainment, that you could really have a significant impact?
When I was in college and I had that little 2-hour class in storytelling, our storytelling teacher, Doris Fisher Harris, who will not hear this podcast most likely. However, people who know her and love her will. So please tell Mrs. Harris I said hello. She rivals Dick Van Dyke in age now.
Oh, wow.
And I go to see her a couple times a year at her retirement home. But one day she gave a lecture about the benefits of storytelling, how it's very good in the classroom, how excellent preachers are good storytellers because they can illustrate their sermons well, how in the corporate world, of course, it's used every day in the advertising department, but it's also used in interpersonal communication. She did this whole lecture on all the benefits of storytelling. And then she just gathered up all of her notes and said, but none of that, ladies and gentlemen, really matters. What I really want you to know is if you are a good storyteller, you will be loved. And then she just walked out of the room. Well, we were too young and green to know how true that would be, And so I started doing my storytelling thing. I largely considered myself an entertainer. The stories that I chose were also very educational, and the majority of my work, particularly in the first half of my career, was in schools where stories needed to serve a purpose. Like you're learning American history through stories, or you're learning to be a better writer because you're analyzing how stories are put together and all that kind of thing. And two things that helped me realize storytelling is more than just entertainment. One, I would get invited back to schools over and over. So the two schools that are closest to my home, neighborhood schools, I worked in those schools 3 weeks as an artist in residence every year for 18 years in a row. And I would say, what? Mix it up, y'all. Have another artist. They were like, no, you're our guy, and the kids that you're talking to this year have moved on to the next grade. We want the same program you did last year for this new crop that, has moved into this grade. And I realized there is still a need in our society for the old man who knows the stuff, like you got to have that person. And that becomes, you feel the love, people value what you bring to them. The other thing that happened was the comments that kids would say. So I had this one group of kids that I had helped grow up. So I saw them in third grade, and in third grade, their social studies curriculum was the history of the state of South Carolina. So our topic that year had been the American Revolution in South Carolina. And then when they're in fourth grade, they begin a 2-year study of the broader American history. So I had developed a series of stories about the Civil War. And then they were in fifth grade and studied the second half of American history. Our subject was World War II. And I told them the story that a World War II veteran had told me when I was a kid. And so I'm just going along and says, anybody have any questions? And this little girl looks at me and she says, in third grade, you told us about the American Revolution. And in fourth grade, we had the Civil War. And in fifth grade, World War II. Wow. Every time you come here, people die. And the whole class laughed. And then another kid said, yeah, but these are really important stories because they tell us why they died and why that's important. And I was like, they get it. This is more than just entertainment. I was like, and you're very gratified and very humbled at the same time because you realize I bear a responsibility. They will remember these stories the rest of their life. I better be telling them something that's worth something,
Yeah.
I've grown fond of, I'm on the cusp of being able to be, my kids are in high school. My wife and I had children later in life. So I'm 56 with teenagers, but I'm right on the cusp of being able to be the old man on the mountain. I get a few more years behind me. So I've grown fond of saying it is a sin to waste someone's time. It's like not in the Bible, but it should be. And so I'm all the time preaching that sermon. Do not tell me a story that doesn't matter. I mean, it can be hilarious and very entertaining. In fact, it needs to be entertaining. Otherwise, why would people pay attention? But it has got to matter.
I love that.
And I learned that from Whoopi Goldberg. When I was in high school, my dear friend, who was also my drama teacher, Pam Hawcom, called me one day and she said, get on your bicycle and get down to the house. I just got a videotape of Whoopi Goldberg's one-woman show from Broadway. You need to see this. So I went down there and she and I sat on the couch together and watched Whoopi Goldberg. And it was just a series of monologues, each one a different and unique character, and just hilarious. She was just at the top of her form. Really funny stuff. And then the story would take a turn, and every one of them was a social commentary. And you would realize this matters. And when it was done, Pam said, what'd you learn from that? And I said, it's not enough to just be funny. It's got to really matter. And she said, yeah. She said, that's what I like about this piece. It really matters.
Is that something that you consciously try to build into everything that you do?
I do. Oddly enough, I don't start with what I want the listener to do or what I want the listener to think or what I want the listener to feel. Those are different types of communicators. A politician always starts stories with the goal of what he wants you to do, which is vote for him. And so that really shapes the story. A preacher often starts with what I want you to believe and accept. That's going to shape that story. But an entertainer has to start with, this has got to be a good story. But generally in the rehearsal process and the writing process, you realize what this means. Like this is, now I see why this story is important. And then you go back and kind of tweak the story a little bit to highlight that some. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll have a really good story and I'll be talking it over with my wife and she's like, you need to put that out on the stage. You should tell that to an audience. And I say, not yet, because I don't know why they should hear it. I can't figure out, why does this story matter? So why are you telling me? And once that clicks, you're like, okay, now I know why I need to. I just did that a couple weeks ago with an audience. I had a story about being snowbound, and it had lots of funny stuff in it. I slipped on the ice and fell and broke my tailbone, was absolutely miserable. And it was a fun story to tell, but it didn't matter. It didn't really matter. Like, so you fell and broke your tailbone. Big, like, why are you telling me? But eventually I sat down. I thought, like, what did I learn from that experience? And what could I share with an audience that would, give this story value? And eventually it worked out, when I tried with the audience.
I call it the story shift.
Yeah.
That what did I believe before the event and how did that event change what I believe now?
Yeah.
And that moment is the shift in the story.
Exactly. And once you find that, everything else just kind of
falls into place.
So much so that the writing process for me is only a means to an end, because I present things. I have books, but the bulk of my work is oral presentation. So I'm very guilty of writing a story until I figure out that moment. And then I never finish the manuscript. I'm like, oh, fine, I'll just tell it.
I want to go back to that conference and you and Bonnie coming home from that conference and going to your family, going to your friends, going to your jobs, your employers, and saying, hey, we're quitting. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're focusing on. Because every calling looks unreasonable to someone, who doesn't share it.
That's true. Yeah. We got all the reactions. So we were at Ridgecrest Conference Center, which is in Asheville, North Carolina. My parents live in Travelers Rest, South Carolina, which is just a 45-minute drive straight down a mountain, and boom, you're at my parents' house. So we thought, we might as well let this cat out of the bag. So on our way out of the conference, I looked at my professor and I said, we're going to quit our jobs and I'm going to be full-time professional storyteller. And he said, don't blame me. And so then we went right down the mountain and, stopped to visit my mom and dad. And I said, I have something to tell y'all. And we told them what we were going to do. And my mom said, thank goodness we've been praying you'd come to your senses with that school teaching business. Wow. So, she was all in from the time I was 6 years old. It didn't worry her. And then my mom and dad, they had started their career as faith missionaries. My dad was a mission pastor and then later took a salaried position in a church. They were very comfortable with living by faith, what people without a Christian worldview would call flying by the seat of your pants, and they had wonderful stories that bolstered my faith about being right down to your last dime and, your needs are met in a very interesting and unexpected way that it instantly becomes a wonderful story. So they were fine with it. When I went to tell church friends, there was one church friend who was just scared to death we were going to starve. And he was a school teacher. So he put me in his car and drove me around to principals and introduced me to them. Like we spent a whole day on a teacher work day just visiting schools and him talking me up because he was so scared I wouldn't get enough work. And then there were other people in the church who would maybe they came to church, joined our church after I had been professional storytelling for a little while. And they would say things like, now your wife's a school teacher. Yes. And we're praying that you'll be able to find employment. And I would say, I have employment. So you got all the reactions.
Yeah. Tim, you have a couple of times in this conversation, you've mentioned your teacher. What was it about her that had such an impact on you? And I remember, was it a couple of years ago that she passed?
Yeah.
Even,
she passed very unexpectedly.
I don't have any teachers that I can even remember their names hardly. And yet you had someone who had such an influence in your life, who invested you, who I'm assuming challenged you, who taught you so much. What was it about her?
She was a very positive person and just relished the joy of life, I think that's why when the Lord called her home, it was really quick. It was like, you just squeeze every ounce of joy out of it and then just exit. So she was diagnosed with liver cancer and did not even get the first treatment. She died that quickly after the diagnosis. But so she was just such a joyful person, and she knew how to make any mundane, everyday thing a great adventure. And of course, kids just love that. Just love that. I remember if she had kids in the car, she'd crank up the radio and she'd say, let me teach you how to car dance. And we'd all dance from the waist up because we're strapped into our seatbelts in the car. She was just full of life and full of adventure. She just made everyday situations adventuresome. And she really loved her students. Pam never married, and she had a lovely family network. I knew like the whole extended family. Her mom and dad were like my adopted grandparents. Her sister and brother-in-law were like an aunt and uncle to me. So she had a wonderful family network, but she never married. So her high school students were like part of her family. She could devote a lot of time to them because she didn't have husband and children of her own that, demanded time from her. And kids really responded to that. And, and as a drama teacher, you're facilitating kids telling stories that are all like, the whole point of a drama, be it a play, be it comedy or tragedy, are these big moments of life. And sometimes that's funny and sometimes that's very serious.
Yeah.
But you're all the time, every day when you work, you're telling these big stories. I don't think she anticipated this when she first became a drama teacher. But very often what that does is it squeezes out of you things that you need to deal with in your own personal life, you know. So she regularly counseled kids. And I don't know how many times we would be rehearsing a play and a former student would walk in and just look at her. And she would say, y'all keep rehearsing. I'll be sitting in the back of the theater. Holler if you need me. And there would be this heart-to-heart conversation. You know, I remember a former drama student. He was like a couple years ahead of me, so he had graduated. His name is Buddy Simpson. He's a pastor now. And he was driving a coal truck, and he lost his brakes, and the truck went off the side of a mountain. And it was only the hand of God that pulled him out of the wreckage. And when he was able to walk again after, you know, rehab and all that, he came to see Pam. And we were rehearsing, you know, and she sat down with him and she said, Buddy, obviously God has a plan for your life or you'd be dead. So your job now is to find out what that plan is and get busy doing it. And he became a state trooper. He did a career as a policeman. And then when he retired from that, he became a pastor. And he's still a working pastor. There was a girl named Alice. Again, she was a little older than me. Wild. And just, everybody would watch that high schooler and go, she will never live to see her 21st birthday. She is going to get in such big trouble. She's going to wind up dead. And one day, she had graduated and we were like, we'll probably never see her again. Alice walks into drama class and she said to Pam, she said, Miss Holcomb, I came back to tell you that I got saved. I am not the person that I used to be, and I am headed to Africa as a missionary. And Pam said, Alice, I am overjoyed, but I simply cannot believe that until I get a postcard with an elephant on it. And about 6 or 8 weeks later, God is my witness, to her school mailbox came a postcard with an elephant on it. And we all cried and rejoiced together like, that is terrific. You know, so that's the kind of person Pam was. So, she helped raise me. You know, it was just way more than she just taught me how to tell a story.
Yeah.
You know, kids really responded to her love and care for them, you know.
Yeah. I've told this story last time you were on our show, but that was a long time ago and we've got a lot of new listeners. And so I would highly encourage any of our listeners to go back and listen to that episode. It's audio only, so you can't watch it. But when I was at a shift in my life, a transition point in my life where I was coming out of full-time vocational ministry, being a pastor for almost 20 years, into wanting to explore what you're doing, performance storytelling, professional storytelling, I reached out to you. You had no clue who I was. A mutual friend of ours, Bruce Montgomery, who's no longer with us, used to co-host the show with me. He knew you from your storytelling world.
Yeah, and I had worked for him because he was a college professor.
He was a college professor,
I had done some storytelling in his classroom.
He said, I'm going to reach out to this guy, Tim Lowry. And I had seen you perform before. He'd sent me a bunch of your YouTube videos and things online. And you had no clue who I was. You were at the top of your game. I tell people that the storytelling world is a lot like Hollywood, that you've got A-listers, B-listers, C-listers, D-listers, and then people that just would love to look at the list. And you, even at that time, 10 years ago, almost exactly 10 years ago, you were an A-lister. You were at the pinnacle, the top of that profession. And yet, for some reason that I still don't fully understand, you took a phone call. You said, let's set up a phone call with a guy that you'd never heard of. And for about 2 years, you and I talked on the phone almost monthly. And you just invested into me. You poured into me. And as I look back on my life and say, who are the most influential people that you've had in your life, your name always comes up because of that time and that investment that you put into me. Our stories don't write themselves. They're edited by people all along the way. And in the story of my life, you were a major editor in my story. And outside of Pam, I guess my question is twofold. First of all, is there anyone else who was what you were to me that was that to you? And then the second part of my question is, people don't do that, what you did for me. And so where does that heart, does that come from? Is it because someone did it for you? Where did that come from?
I guess probably a lot of that was modeled for me by my father. My dad was, he knew from the time he was about 17 that he was going to be a preacher. So he was always like on that trajectory. And his work, his path took him to the mountains of Kentucky. In the very early part of his career as a pastor, he worked in a church congregation where there was a very high illiteracy rate. So people were people of faith, but they couldn't read their own Bibles. And he realized right away, you can't build a relationship with this congregation over coffee and a theological discussion, or let's all read C.S. Lewis together. That ain't going to happen. You know, what they understood and valued was hard work. You know, these were coal miners, people who worked for the power company, linemen, loggers, that kind of thing. They all were very traditional. So they had big old gardens and stuff. So my dad would help them plow and help them plant and build. My dad was is a gifted builder. His dad had been a plumber and carpenter. So he had learned all those skills as a kid. So he would do plumbing work for people. I mean, back then, I was born in 1970. My dad started in ministry in the late 60s. There were plenty of homes where he was ministering who had not had an indoor bathroom yet. And he would help them put in their, indoor bathroom. He helped build things, re-roof people's houses, that kind of thing. And working alongside people gave him opportunity to talk with them about spiritual things. He would never have had those opportunities if he wasn't willing to just get in there and get his hands dirty and stuff. So a huge part of his ministry was doing for and with people, not preaching. He did preach every Sunday, but what they really loved and respected him for was his willingness and ability to work alongside whoever or whatever.
Yeah.
He took up hunting because, in fact, it was my pal Pam, who was my drama teacher, her brother-in-law. My dad had a great burden for his eternal soul. What Britt Lawson loved was squirrel hunting. So my dad would get up at the crack of dawn and go squirrel hunting all the blooming time.
That's love.
Britt, because that's what Britt loves. I'll love that too. And my dad did genuinely enjoy it, but I remember him, sometimes being conflicted, like, I'm not spending a lot of time in the office preparing my next sermon because I went squirrel hunting 3 times this week with Britt, but he really wants to go. So I think I should go, back and forth. But then there came a day, when the Holy Spirit got a hold of Britt and he called my dad it was late at night, that was a very thrilling moment. And Dad said, it is time. So I remember my sister and I got up out of bed and threw on coats and boots and we drove down to Britt's house. And like 11:30 at night, my dad talked to him and he became a Christian. So that had been modeled for me, like, okay, so you're a storyteller, but what you really are is is a relationship builder, you know, and so that's just always been how I operate, I guess. And I will say that maybe it's not always completely free and easy on my side to give, because I also know when you create relationships with people, you're going to get some really good stories out of that. Like, you know, I have a relationship with you. Consequently, I don't tell it to audiences because it's not my story to make money off of. But in casual conversation, I just love telling other friends who do not know you about the time you nearly slingshotted yourself across the valley, cutting down trees and, you know, just wacky adventures and things. So there's benefit to me.
You can use anything you want. You can have it all.
So I love that. Older, more experienced storyteller, Elizabeth Ellis, she lives in Texas, said in a workshop one time, she said, it stands all of us well to remember that when we get up there on that stage and look at all those people who are looking at us, 90% of them are currently in pain. And she said, some of them are in physical pain, some of them are in emotional pain, some of them are in spiritual pain. She said, it's a given. It just stands you well to recognize and understand that before you open your mouth. A big part of what you're doing, and that's exactly how she says it too, because she shoots from the hip, you know, before you open your mouth. She said, it just stands you well to realize whether or not it's the primary purpose of the story you're telling, you are a healer. You're helping people cope. So I like to do that. I realize this is a big responsibility, but I like to do that. I like to visit with my audience before the show. You know, I don't hide behind the curtain. I mean, there's a part of me that will always long for a big, deep baritone voice in a spotlight. And they say, ladies and gentlemen, storyteller Tim Lowry. And the crowd goes wild just by my reputation. But that only happens for select people like Johnny Carson and Nate Bargatze. But my work is more be out there in the house, visiting with people, shaking hands, talking to them. And
can we go down that road a little more?
Sure.
Because one of the things that I think is so incredible about what you do, you just alluded to there. And then we'll use this to transition to something else that I want to talk about as well, is that I see a disturbing trend, I think, in performance storytelling where it's getting dark, it's getting negative. And my wife says all the time that healed people heal people, hurting people hurt people.
That makes good sense.
And when you're telling stories, it doesn't matter if it's in a classroom, and you've told me stories in our private conversations about kids that were in really dark places, and through hearing you tell stories, there's been an impact there and change that's taken place. I know that in witnessing you tell stories in front of audiences of tens of people and of thousands of people, that you have a long line anytime you're done of people coming up that wanting to share their story with you because what you've done has healed them in some way. But a lot of what I'm seeing out of performance storytelling is you walk away from it feeling worse than you did when you came in. Because the stories are dark.
A litany of what's wrong with the world.
Yeah, exactly.
What's wrong with me? And the worst ones are, they look at the audience and tell you what's wrong with you.
Exactly. Exactly. So how has story healed you? Healed people heal people. How has story impacted your life personally?
When I was a little boy, I was very fearful child. People would say a sensitive child, a nervous child, that, those kinds of things. Hearing stories about, just as a Sunday school kid, constantly rehearing stories about how God protects his people, how God is in control, how, little Sunday school songs that backed up the theme of the story, like "Why worry when you can pray?" Just that began to affect me. You know, like I have not been thrown in a fiery dungeon, but I know people who were, and I know how God miraculously protected them. I do not need to be afraid. I still have to be reminded of that when there's a tornado warning. I can handle about any natural disaster until the tornado siren goes off. Then I'm like, oh my word. Our family joke is that, internally my organs freak out when there's, and so, they're like, if you don't have a basement, the safest room in your house is the bathroom. And my girls will say, Dad will already be in there. So that affected me. That was one way stories changed me, helped me grow in my faith. Stories about when you learn about someone else's experience. I mean, you've heard an older, wiser person has said to every young person at some point, stop complaining. There's always someone else in the world who has it worse than you, and then you learn, somebody's story and you're like, yeah, that's true. I find so many stories help me be more grateful, very thankful. The one that really does that is funny because I was just talking to a friend about this last night. I tell Dickens' Christmas Carol every bloomin' year. I mean, this year I already have like 16 performances on my calendar of Dickens' Christmas Carol. I've been a Dickens interpreter for 24 years.
You wrote a book on Dickens?
I wrote a book about my career as a Dickens interpreter. And that story, Dickens wrote it to reflect his own, Dickens said, the way Christmas Carol got started was he had two things rolling around in his mind. He was very concerned for the plight of the poor, particularly in London. And secondly, he had been contemplating what we would call the red letter words of the New Testament, the quotations of Christ. And he said, I decided I wanted to write a story that illuminated one thing that Jesus said. And he said, so I had been meditating on let the little children come to me. And he said, what grew out of that was A Christmas Carol. And so it is his meditation on that little statement. And what does that look like in your world? What does that look like on your street? What does that look like between you and your neighbor? And I never perform that story that I'm not a better person for it.
And you've told it how many times?
Oh, I would have to look in the notebook, but I know I'm past my 200th performance. And so somebody last night, they said, they said, do you like pick like what theme you're going to highlight that year? They said, because it's always a little bit different. It's the same story, but you picked it. I said, two things happened to me when I said, about 1st of November, you pull out the story and review it, make sure, dust the cobwebs off, you get this sentence exactly right, and blah, blah, blah. I said, so there's a point in the rehearsal where I'm just going to stand on the floor in my office and pretend I've got an audience and just do the whole thing out loud to see if it's still all in my brain. I said, and I never have that rehearsal without there's a point where I just have to stop because I see myself and I don't like what I'm looking at. And I'm like, I'm going to have a little come to Jesus meeting about gotten a little selfish, or you've gotten a little prideful, or you've gotten a little, you're not paying attention to needs and opportunities that are right at your doorstep. Wake up. It always does that for me. The other thing that happens is during the rehearsal process from about November 1st till you start right after Thanksgiving performing it, something happens in world news. Something somewhere that is like exactly something Dickens has commented on in that story. And you're like, oh, well, here we go, you know, and you just know I'm just going to be quoting the words of Dickens and my whole audience is going to go, oh, like, I can't believe you brought that up. Don't blame me. He's been dead for over 150 years, but it's just an extremely relevant story to the human condition, you know? So that story definitely affects me, continues to affect me.
That's great. All right. So Tim, we live in the shortest attention span culture in human history. Social media has changed the way that we consume content. It's changed the way that we think. It's changed the way that we view. Our paradigm has shifted because of it. Why do stories still matter?
Remind me to answer that question. Let's go back because you ask about darkness.
Yeah.
Why do so many people tell dark stories? Stories always come from the heart. You know, the Bible says, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. That is just a real pithy way of saying whatever is in your soul that's what you're going to be putting out there into the world all the time. So,
and civilizations change, but the human heart doesn't change.
Exactly. And so it might be sad and it might be disappointing that you see performers who are always looking at the dark and negative side of life. But it should not surprise you. Without light in the heart, you cannot give light to the world.
Oh, wow.
You just can't. And so don't be angry with them. Don't be reactionary to them. That's God telling you, pray for them. I will, pray and ask for light for that person. That's the only thing that will fix that. And so I am not a big culture warrior. Like just a movie will come out. It happens periodically. A movie comes out that's just godless. And, Christian audiences just have a cow, and they're like, we're going to boycott this theater. We're not going to watch anything that producer does. We're not going to buy any products connected to that. And I think, and what have you won? If you win that culture war, what have you won? You got your way. That's all that happened there. They're just going to go produce another thing that's godless because they have no light. Pray for light. Support Christian artists who are like my dad, willing to get their hands dirty in that world and just work alongside those people for those little moments when they can plant seeds, when they can share light. That's a better way to approach this. Don't try to win a culture war.
I love that.
You won't.
Yeah.
You might get your way on that instance, but you haven't done anything that's really, has lasting value.
Yeah.
Don't spend all your time in wood, hay, and stubble. Look for gold and precious stones.
Years ago, we had when I was living in Las Vegas, the mayor of the city of Las Vegas did some things that really upset the Christian community. I think that he was wanting to legalize prostitution or something like that, and just sent the Christian community into an uproar. And there were letters to the editors, there were pickets, there were protests calling for his job, wanting him to get fired. And I remember having a similar conversation with someone. I was young and immature back then, and having a similar conversation where they said, what good is this doing? Let's say that he does lose his job, that he does get fired. What is he going to think of Christians? That Christians caused him to lose his job, lose his position, lose his livelihood. Instead, if all the Christians who are out there picketing, what if they were praying? What if they were praying for him and his heart and his spirit, his soul, his eternity? And imagine if 5 years from now, he was still the mayor, but he came to know Christ because of all the Christians that were praying for him and trying to influence him, and the difference that could make in this city, as opposed to getting someone just fired. We're putting our attention in the wrong things. And instead of letting our voices be heard through hate, let our voices be heard through love through prayer, through caring.
Yeah.
So I love what you just said.
Be known for what you're for, not what you're against all the time. So then you asked,
why do stories still matter?
Why do stories still matter?
Yeah.
We've got all of this. We've got podcasts. Why do stories still matter? Because people matter. We will see this many times in many ways and more frequently. People adopt technology. I mean, if you look at the course of human history, I think you could see a pattern. People adopt technology, and then the next great era, they long for community and human relationship. Then they adopt technology. Then they long for human relationship and connectivity. So that's one reason why stories still matter. From a Christian worldview, more than 70% of the Bible is narrative. You know, look at the ministry of Jesus. Just look at the scope of his earthly ministry. The overwhelming majority of his teaching was in story form. I mean, so much so that we know the Sermon on the Mount was one of those rare occasions when it wasn't in story form. It was more a lecture. If for no other reason, it's obviously important to God. That's why stories matter, you know. And woe be unto him who tells God what's not important. You'll learn.
How much does your faith play a role in your storytelling career?
There would be no reason to do what I do without it. I mean, I just wouldn't see the point, you know. Interesting enough, I was in a museum yesterday and I saw a really vivid, I was like, ooh, that's a story that I have to research now and learn to tell, because it was such a great story. We are in Jonesboro, Tennessee. So I was at the town museum, and there's a rather well-known story here in Jonesboro, Tennessee that I was not familiar with, because when I come here, I'm busy working, performing and stuff. Like, I never have time to go to the museum. So finally I got some time to go to the museum. There was a man named Elihu Embry, who lived here back in the 19th century, and he had multiple business interests. He was a Quaker. And so the Quakers, you know, historically were always opposed to slavery. They were leading abolitionists. But he, when he married, his wife's family had enslaved servants. And so he inherited from his wife's family slaves. He, by his own testimony, fell away from the faith and became a deist. And so he was a slave owner. Then there was a revival of the spirit, and he came back to his Quaker roots. But by then, he had used a particular slave. Her name was Nancy, and her children as collateral on a loan for some of his business interests. And so he wrote a letter to a friend saying, I want to free them, but I can't, because they're wrapped up as collateral in a business loan. And until I can pay the loan off, I cannot free them. And he said, I fell away from my faith and became a deist. And now I've come back to my faith, but there are consequences that I can't undo. He for a time did not let faith be the primary thing in his life, and it was devastating, you know. And I thought, ooh, what a fascinating story. So he died in debt, and his family allowed Nancy and her children to live as free people the rest of their lives, but they were actually technically never free. If there had been some sort of legal issue, they'd have been in trouble because they weren't free. But they did the best they could, I guess, under the circumstances. But I thought, wow, what a poignant example of, keep the main thing in your own mind and heart, because you can really screw it up if you don't. And so, yeah, that's always my prayer. Consequently, let's go. You were talking about dark storytelling. In that same vein, a lot of storytelling can become those dark stories. They become confessional because without the light of Christ, you have this intuitive feeling that I have done wrong and I need to unburden myself.
Wow.
You tell these horrible things, personal things, to total strangers in this audience, and ooh, man, those are really cringeworthy stories. And it was actually a storyteller who I was talking to who is not a Christian at all. And we were trying to kick around, how do you define those kinds of stories? And he said, they're confessional. And I said, they are.
Wow.
That's exactly what they are. You don't have an intimate relationship with someone who can absolve you of that. And so you're trying to unburden yourself.
Wow.
And
that's a great insight.
Yeah. I was like, wow. So confession is good for the soul. How does faith play in what you do and why? Well, I just don't see the point without the faith. Consequently, you got to be willing to check in every once in a while and say, okay, I'm a little off track. So I've been reading the book of Ecclesiastes, and at the same time, so I'm reading that in the morning, but the other day, just a couple days ago, I woke up at 1:00 in the morning with my phone laying on my chest, and what was playing was Delta Burke and Dixie Carter having an argument on a rerun of Designing Women on my phone. And I was like, vanity of vanities. This has got to go. This is robbing me of my ability to think straight, to concentrate on things that really matter. This has got to go. So I am now in the process. And the way that was playing was I had gotten on Facebook and I thought, I'll look at this until I'm sleepy. Well, of course, you click on the video and you fall asleep, and then just one video plays after another video. And that's playing in your subconscious as your phone lays on your chest. And so I very commonly, find myself in the shower the next morning, and what's running through my head is dialogue from a rerun of Designing Women, not quotations from the Bible, not a story I'm working on. And so I was like, this has got to go. This has got to go. So I'm now in the tedious process of personally contacting every follower on Facebook, every single one individually, and giving them just a little announcement that I'm getting off of here. I can't handle this. It's just, it can be a useful tool, but for me, it's become, if not an idol, at least a waste of time. And what did I say? It is a sin to waste somebody's time, particularly God's. It's got to go.
Wow.
So I'm emailing every single follower. I don't have a gazillion, but there's well over 2,000, and saying, here's my email address. I love you. I'm very flattered that you want to keep up with me, and I would love to know what you're up to, but let's email, because I got to let this go. Got to go.
That's a big step.
It is, and people are like, are you sure you're going to do? Are you sure? Because that's like how people learn about where you're performing and buy tickets and all that. And I'm like, yes, I am sure, because I know I need to just cut that out. And if I'm not willing to do that, what am I saying? I am now telling lies about God. You think God's not big enough to make up the difference for you? You think God needs Facebook to promote your work? Shut up. You're an idiot. Sit down and be quiet. You no longer have anything valid to say. So it's got to go. It's just got to go. And it's good that I have this opportunity to say that in a public forum so that 6 weeks from now, people can say, I still see you have a Facebook account. They can hold me accountable and say, let it go. You said you were going to let that go.
Well, Tim, we've got to start wrapping this thing up. I've got a couple more questions that I want to ask you. First thing is you've said your daughters, and I'm absolutely shocked by this, that both of your girls are now in high school. That just makes me feel old. You're not too far away from them being out of the house, marriage, grandkids, all of that fun stuff. When you think about your future grandkids, what story do you hope that they tell about Tim Lowry?
About me?
About you?
Nobody ever asked me that question before. What story would they tell about me? Of course, I would want them to say, my future grandchildren, I want them to say, oh, he loved us. He always was happy to see us coming, all of that kind of thing. What story? I suppose, there were so many people in my growing up years who would let me be Peter Pan. My mom, she was like, that kid wants to be in show business and I'm going to let him do that. My pal Pam, my storytelling teacher in college. I think that's what I would love my grandchildren to say about me. Grandpa would let us be Peter Pan. I just think that would be a really high compliment. He just let us be kids.
If this were the last story that you got to tell, what would you hope people would remember about you?
Nothing about me. I don't know where I was. I was talking to a small group somewhere, and I said, somebody on national news was worried about so-and-so's legacy. And I said, I am fully convinced if we spend less time worried about our legacy and more time worried about our neighbor, the legacy will take care of itself. Name them, Mother Teresa, Princess Diana. You name these people who have these long, huge, worldwide legacies. They were never worried about their legacy. They were worried about their neighbor.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say. I don't care.
Two things that I've heard over the course of just the last month or two that have really, one of those things that you hear that just replays in your mind over and over and over, and I've shared both of them on this show a couple of times, is I was listening to another podcast. There are others out there that are worth listening to other than the Pulpit and Porch. And the guy was talking about legacy, and he said, do you remember, do you even know the name of your great-grandfather? You even know his name?
Yeah.
And I don't know the name of my great-grandfather. Couldn't tell you a single story. So he said, in 2 generations, no one will remember you. Yeah. The number of people that are remembered 2 generations from now in the history of humanity, that 2 generations out, you remember their name.
And I'll give you a great example of that. That happened this very morning before I got into this studio. So my daughter is with me and she's at summer camp. So I had to run her to summer camp and we were in a kind of hurry. We woke up late, like, oh, we got to hurry, got to be on time and all that. So I thought, I got to get myself calm back down so I could talk rationally with Tony on this recording. So I went to a local coffee shop. I had 15 minutes. I'm like, I'll just drink a cup of coffee and just kind of, and then I'll be ready to go over to Tony's and do this thing. So I sit down in this coffee shop and there are 4 men at the table next to me and they all have prayer books open. And we said, good storytellers are good listeners. So yeah. I am an unapologetic eavesdropper. So I'm like, That's interesting. Let me just pretend like I'm pecking on my phone. I want to hear what they're saying. So they were talking about, they were working their way through a Bible study that was a Bible study prayer guide about missionary works around the world, particularly unreached people groups and languages that don't have the Bible in their native tongue yet. And they're learning about these people and praying for them. And so I went over to them and I said, I've been eavesdropping on you and I've been listening to everything you've been talking and praying about. And I want to tell you a story. This has everything to do with legacy. And I said, I'm a professional storyteller. And they said, I thought you looked familiar because my face was on a poster on the bulletin board in the coffee shop. And I said, I'm a professional storyteller and I was hired to tell stories on a yacht one time. This big fancy, but I mean like crazy rich people. And they hired me to come aboard the yacht when they were in City Marina in Charleston, South Carolina, where I live, and entertain them for an hour. So I did that. And this lady looks at me and she says, professional storytelling. She said, I've never met a professional storyteller before, but I'm familiar with storytelling because I am a supporter of Wycliffe translators. Have you ever heard of them? And I said, yes. I said, I have personal friends that I grew up with who are missionaries with Wycliffe. And she said, we train storytellers to go in ahead of Bible translators and teach people the big stories of the Bible in chronological order, because in an oral culture, that's how they're going to receive the word first, is orally, because then after you translate the Bible, you have to teach them to read because they don't even read yet. So she said it's this long process, and storytelling is a big part of that process. I know exactly what you do. And I said, and I really, it's thrilling for me to have the opportunity to thank you for financially supporting. And I dare say, in the environment I was in, she supports it in a big, significant way. We're on the same team. You're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing. But the ultimate goal is very mutual.
Yeah.
And so I told these men that story, and I said, I just thought you would appreciate knowing that you and me and that lady will spend a long time in eternity being introduced to people we have prayed for.
Wow.
We helped facilitate a story that will have a legacy far beyond our own lives. So there you go.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Amazing.
How cool is that?
I love that. All right, let's talk some business really quick. How can people get a hold of Tim? How can they hear about you? How can they find out more about you? You're not on social media.
Not on social media.
So how do they find-
So you can go to storytellertimlowry.com and you can just explore stuff there. There's information about my work and my performance schedule and storytelling recordings that you can purchase for download, and you can find me on Amazon.com. I'm an author, so you can just
we've
Amazon
got
me
right here.
You can
We've
find
got
Haunted
2 books,
Haunted by Dickens, and the second book is called Southern Fried Circus. You can find those.
Haunted by Dickens right here that you can pick up, and then we've also got Southern Fried Circus, both of these books right here that you can find on Amazon.
Ta-da, the shameless merchandising and self-promotion. So that's how you can find me. You can sign up for my monthly email. I'm on YouTube. There's lots of YouTube videos of stories.
Can you hear stories on Spotify? So after you're done listening to this podcast, hop on over and listen to Tim tell some stories.
You can. And if you're super intrigued with the art of storytelling, you could check out online the Appleseed radio show, which is a radio show that's on satellite radio, totally dedicated to storytelling. You'll hear storyteller Tim Lowry and all kinds of other storytellers on the Appleseed. That's a fun thing to check out as well.
That's amazing. Well, Tim, thank you so much for spending some time here on the porch.
Pleasure.
This was incredible. And, one of the things that I love most about storytellers is that they remind us that we're not just living our lives, that we're leaving them behind, that every story we tell, every community that we share with, every person has stories. The question isn't whether or not your life tells a story. The question is, what story are you writing? So maybe this week, instead of scrolling a little bit longer, maybe you put down the phone. Maybe sit down with someone older than you, younger than you, and ask them to share a story about a different time, a different place. Ask them how they met the love of their life. Ask them about their greatest failure or maybe their greatest joy in life. Because one day, those stories will only exist if someone cared enough to actually listen to them. So thank you for listening to this edition of the Pulpit and Porch. We really want to thank Tim Lowry. Please visit his website, Storyteller Tim Lowry. Find him on YouTube. Listen to him wherever you would stream your favorite music, and buy some of his books and his products on Amazon right here. He also has a new book coming out. When will the new book be coming out?
Sometime this fall, hopefully before Christmas shopping season.
Before Christmas, yeah. Be looking for that, a children's storybook.
Children's picture book it's a true story about a man who lost his pants to a well-placed cannon shot during the American Revolution.
There you go. If you're not intrigued by that, we're already counting down, waiting for that one, because that's going to be incredible. Again, thank you for listening. We're honored that you chose to spend some time with us today. Wherever you're at, however you're listening, be sure to hit that like button, that subscribe button, follow us, and share us with your friends, because people need to hear more great stories like the one Tim just shared with us today. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next week right here on the Pulpit and Porch.